Hi everyone, my name is Meira Lerner and this is the Civil Discourse Project. The Civil Discourse Project is a video podcast aimed to promote civil, respectful conversation about hot-button contested issues between people with opposing views. This is not a formal debate or an outlet for anyone to attack their opposer. It is simply an exercise in civil discourse and discussion in an age where that is becoming more and more difficult and unpopular. Every episode will focus on a different topic, which will be discussed by two guests with opposing views on that topic. I will act as a moderator to ensure that the conversation stays on topic and stays respectful. This week's topic is about the Iran deal. Newly instated, President Biden has made it clear that he intends to re-enter the Iran deal in some form or another. There has been a lot of discussion from members of his camp about what that would look like, whether they would attempt to renegotiate the deal, if Iran would go back to full compliance, if they would cooperate with Israel and other Gulf states, and more than that even. Benjamin Netanyahu has already expressed that he believes the US should maintain tight, strict sanctions and pressure on Iran, and has made clear that any deal with Iran cannot allow for there to be any chance at all of Iran reaching the capacity to maintain nuclear weapons. There doesn't really seem to be a clear message about what happens next. Today's guests will discuss their views on the subject and what they'd like to see happen. With that, I'd like to introduce this week's guests. Presenting the conservative side of the issue, we have Jeremy Glickman. And presenting the liberal side of the issue, we have Lawrence Kasmir. Jeremy, can you, in just a sentence or two, tell us who you are and why you decided to participate in the Civil Discourse Project?
My name is Jeremy Glickman. I am a conservative, or constitutional conservative, I guess. And I just think that people like talking past each other and then resort to their little echo chambers on Facebook. And I think real conversations need to be had in order to, I guess, raise awareness that we're all really not that different and we all kind of just are good people and care, and the other guy on the other side isn't a jerk.
Right. Lawrence, same question for you.
Hi, I'm Lawrence. I live in Israel, and I am taking part in this conversation because I don't have a Twitter account, and even if I did, I wouldn't want anyone to kick me off of it for my views. So I think this is a very worthwhile forum to discuss a complex issue without having to worry about the nuance of a Facebook thread.
All right. Thank you both so much. We're going to get started. I would like to remind both of you that I will be calling out any out-of-line behavior. I will raise my hand if I feel that anyone is getting too aggressive or disrespectful. I will also raise my hand if I think that one person has been talking for a long time without giving the other person a chance to have their say. If I feel that the conversation is getting off topic, I will step in to guide us back to the topic. I may also step in at various points to ask questions to guide us to be able to cover as many aspects of this topic as possible. I'd like to open the discussion with a question for Lawrence, and then please take it away from there. So Lawrence, would you be in favor of the US rejoining the Iran deal in its current form? And if not, what do you think would need to change in order to make the deal a viable option?
The Iran deal is not perfect, and I think that. But on the other hand, I think you'd be very naive to think that it is possible to get a perfect deal, certainly from, I guess, the Western side, which is our side of this discussion. So out of a series of imperfect choices, joining the Iran deal as it currently is probably the best one available.
Jeremy, go ahead, take it from there. This is a conversation for the two of you.
Oh, okay. So the idea of the best available, as opposed to having no deal at all, I think is probably the conversation to be had. I find it difficult to have an agreement with a country like Iran because I don't think there's a lot of good faith going on. Meaning, is it really that important that they don't enrich uranium if they're still the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world? I mean, do we really care to help them do whatever they want to do if they're not really good actors in the region. And then the question I would pose to you is, if you're going to live in a world where the Iran deal is something that we sign on to, is it worth sacrificing the Abraham Accords? Because I don't think you can have both. I don't think Israel can make peace and take the side of all of the other countries that oppose Iran and Turkey, I suppose. But at the same time, you have America, who's Israel's ally, disassociating from that and joining with, Iran.
I think there's I have to take issue with the second point first, and then I'll get back to the supporting the bad actor. Like Israel has and I'm going to really embarrass myself now when I get this wrong. Israel has been working with the Sunni states such as Saudi Arabia for, I got that right. Like Saudi Arabia covertly for probably the best part of a decade. So I don't think I think the Iranian situation, Iran is a common enemy, and my enemy's enemy is my friend. Is pretty applicable to this. I don't think that I don't think that there's any way to stop Iran really still becoming a problematic actor, still trying to achieve regional hegemony, with or without Iran, with or without the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal will just prevent Iran getting currently the ultimate weapon on the planet, and essentially making itself unattackable.
Temporarily.
Pardon?
Temporarily.
I think if you look at any nuclear state, that countries don't attack nuclear states. Like if you look at North Korea.
I'm sorry. I just meant that the enrichment process, according to the nuclear deal, can continue in like 4 years.
Okay. So I'm sure we'll come back to that. I can definitely. I hear you about the sunset agreement, and I think I think actually one thing that I really struggle with, and it took me a long time to find an explanation of why the sunset agreement isn't such a bad thing, and I want to come back to that. But I just want to say that I think what you're saying about how if the US goes back to the Iran deal, then that somehow screws over Israel with the Arab states that it's made peace with, and I don't think that's true at all. Like, I think these states want to do business with Israel. I don't think it's going to change whether Iran is brought back into the fold or not. So I just have to really disagree and discount that part of the argument. And in terms of the bad actor state, like what you're saying about being a bad actor, Iran, the nuclear deal was focused just on Iran's nuclear weapons, and the alternative to the nuclear deal is the continuation of sanctions. Is essentially, well, there's two options. One is the continuation of sanctions, and the other is essentially a military attack. And we when we had our pre-meeting, sorry to pull the curtain back here, we both agreed that a military option is just really not viable in any way, shape, or form. So, and the bottom line is sanctions don't work. Like unilateral sanctions by any country, even America, are ineffective. Like we've had Trump's maximum pressure since 2018, and Iran's still gone ahead and enriched uranium, and it hasn't stopped the Ayatollahs from continuing their path. The only thing which actually stopped them was the nuclear deal.
Can I ask, what do you mean by not effective?
As in, the sanctions not effective.
You said not effective, but what do you mean by not effective?
As in, Iran have continued to continue the pathway to create a nuclear weapon, with the fact they've started enriching uranium up to 20%, which
I would agree that they're not going to achieve the same goal as some kind of diplomatic agreement. I just don't think that there's a diplomatic agreement that Iran is going to make. I think when you have a nation state that's ideologically driven, they don't need to respect, meaning with a non-reformed Muslim nation state where their ideology is radical, according to, I would say, most objective people, I don't think you're going to end up getting them to do what you want them to do. If the Iran deal was made the same way without a sunset clause, you can never enrich past, what was it, like 3-something% or 4%. I think you'd have a real argument on your hands. I don't know if I could disagree with it. Give them a chance. There's always a chance until, if they start getting to 50%, we can bomb them whenever we want. We can invade whenever we want. But I just think that what's the point of pushing it off 10 years if they're still going to be sponsoring terrorism around the world? They're still not cooperating with their neighbors. They're still pushing or supporting Syria, which is, just demolishing its people. I think you have, a lot of things that they're going to need to do in order for them to really show that they're interested. And I would agree with you that sanctions aren't going to accomplish that, but sanctions are definitely going to hinder them in doing all of the bad things that they're doing around the world.
Sure. So I think that there's like two separate issues here. One is Iran's geopolitical, geostrategic goals, and the second is the nuclear weapon. And my understanding is that after the Iranian deal expires, after the sunset clause, it's not like, okay, well, off you go Iranians, you can do whatever you want. It's no, now we negotiate to, hopefully the deal has been good for you, as this is the US side. The US can go to Iran, say hopefully the deal's been good for you. It's helped you, look after, not that they care about their people, look after your people, or at least enrich the regime and the sponsor and all the Republican Guards and the Ayatollah and all his family, enrich them with bribes. And it's like, oh, this is a good thing. We're going to keep this going.
I mean, I feel like a renegotiation could happen at any time.
Well, yeah, but you have to have a deal in place to renegotiate it. So it's not like saying, okay, well, after 10 years, we're going to start negotiating now. It's like, okay, fine, the deal's been good. We can negotiate to continue the deal. And also, once there's trust, as you were saying at the beginning, once there's trust brought between the two sides, then they can start negotiating on other issues. Like Iran are not, from the Iranian perspective, you have to think, okay, well, you've got Israel, who is, a US-sponsored regional military superpower, Saudi Arabia, who theoretically, there are rumors that they can get a nuclear bomb from Pakistan anytime they want to. And Saudi Arabia are trying to, get Sunni hegemony around the region. So you can see from the Iranian perspective, they feel threatened. They're backed into a corner. So they also want to build trust from the Western world, from the other nations in the world, and and having a treaty which is kept, which is respected, which unlike Trump did, could actually build that trust. For the next deal, which would be, maybe stopping Iran developing ballistic missiles, which everyone is worried about. But it's like one thing at a time.
Yeah, I would take this away from pointing at like whether Trump backing out when he did was a good decision. I think at the time I was arguing that this was a terrible idea for Obama, meaning like in 2015. I was saying how bad this was. When he sent $2 billion in cash in a plane and dropped it in Iran, that was terrible. And I mean, unconstitutional, but that was terrible. I don't think that having an agreement like this, where you're going to the table on even footing, like comparing America, Israel, and Iran and putting them at the same table and saying, okay, you all have a seat at the table, seems a little ridiculous to me. America and Israel and Iran don't act like the same country when you're thinking about them in the global scheme. Iran needs to do a lot more work before they deserve to be treated like a normal country. They're the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Why is that not part of any kind of deal? Who cares if they have a bomb? They continuously support terrorism around the entire world. Why are they coming to the table as if we need to give them a leg up when they're spending all of their resources on hurting everyone? they have a different idea of what the world needs to be. They don't care about their borders. They don't care about the qualifications that make you deserve to be at the table. I think they have to prove that before we kind of give them a leg up.
I'd actually like to jump in with a question quickly to Jeremy. From what you're saying, it seems like that in your opinion, it doesn't seem like there's really any room for Iran to have a seat at that table, as you said. What would it take, in your opinion, for America and for Israel? So let's just throw that in there if we're already talking about America, Israel, and Iran. What would it take, in your opinion, for Israel and Iran and America, to be able to trust Iran and to be able to trust that they'll hold up their end of the bargain?
I would say, like what I've said before, stop supporting terrorism. Stop the death to America, death to Israel chants on every news channel all the time. Start supporting the region, not just your country. I think that you have some of the Arab countries, the ones that have, openly talked or open diplomatic relationships with Israel in particular, have started to de-radicalize. They realize that their economy and their quality of life is better if they don't, not de-radicalize, rather reform. Like Christianity, Judaism, they've all gone through reformations over the last 1,000 years, and Islam really hasn't. And I think that ramping down the hate that they express towards the West and towards Israel would be a much better step than anything else that's in the nuclear question, because I think that's a lot further off and less immediate. You have that old saying, I think it was Golda Meir said, if Israel put down its guns tomorrow, there would be no Israel. But if Arabs put down their guns tomorrow, there would be peace. And I think that's true when it comes to Iran. I don't think it's true. I think it's true when it comes to a lot of these countries that are just still too militant.
I think from Iran's perspective, looking at the amount of weapons that Saudi Arabia has, I think that Iran would feel very threatened by demilitarizing in a region where they're currently fighting a proxy war in Yemen. But I don't think that's what you're saying is at all a realistic prospect. So we're better off retain to Biden retain to the G6+1 negotiated, the P6+1 negotiated treaty, P5+1 negotiated treaty, and 5. There you go. P5 shows how much research I've been doing. P5+1 negotiated treaty, and actually try and build that trust so that Iran actually might feel that it can start demilitarizing and stop supporting, terrorist or at least non-state actors in the region. Yes, Hezbollah are terrorists. So there's.
I agree with you that I don't think it's something that's practical. I don't think that's something that they're willing to do or close to. But I don't think that having a treaty first is something that's going to make them trust and then demilitarize. I think their ideology is radical. I think they want to kill people, not because they feel defensive, but because I think it's their job, according to God, their God, to make a caliphate and to kill anyone who doesn't believe. I think that that's their ideology. Not everyone in Iran, but that's definitely the leadership in Iran. It's definitely the leadership in Syria. I wish it wasn't. And I think my answer to Mira's question was more hypothetical of what it would take for me to start trusting them. But I don't think it was an actionable, starting point. I don't think that that's something they'd ever agree to, because I think their ideology is wrong.
I would just say that, you say Iran is, this, an aggressive aggressive state, radical state, trying to impose its ideology. I think I think the USA, since its founding, has been at peace for about 20 years. if we're talking about, from the Iranian perspective, about talking about warlike people trying to impose that ideology on other nations, I don't think the USA is this peaceful angel, which. Are
you trying to compare the ideologies of America and the ideologies of Iran?
Well, I would say that America has tried to do a lot of colonialization, trying to boost democracy throughout the world, is currently occupying 2 countries.
I agree with you. But I'm just saying,
guys, we're getting off topic. Let's not start going after America and Iran. That's not the point here. We're talking about Iran, not which culture is,
Jeremy, when we were, asked to do this conversation, it's like, should Biden join the deal? And, you're talking about hypothetical, like an impossible hypothetical situation that, in your mind that they should never negotiate with Iran unless Iran undergo a radical shift in their foreign policy. And since that's not good, sanctions aren't going to make that happen, because Iran have been sanctioned since, I think 1995. So, we've had 25 years of sanctions to get to this point of nothing happening. North Korea has been sanctioned and nothing has happened to North Korea. Venezuela has been sanctioned and Maduro's still there. Like, sanctions don't happen. The only way to actually change a country is to bring this to the negotiating table. We looked at, if you look at Germany after World War I, where the victors, the Allies, essentially punished Germany, and that created a resentment. Leading to World War II, and only in World War II, when Germany was welcomed back in and supported and rebuilt by the victors, that Germany is now part of leading democracy and part of ensuring world peace. You can look at some historical models where actually embracing a country is much more effective than ostracizing them, and that's scary.
I agree with you. I think it's hard to compare all of these countries the same. Meaning, I think that if you were to appease some of the leaders in the countries you mentioned that sanctions haven't worked in, I don't think you're gonna get. I wouldn't think that you're gonna get a better solution. I think that it's more likely that a country needs to rebel or rise up against its government that's oppressing them. I think the only way, and I think we learned this in Afghanistan, the only way you're going to put in a government that does what it does better for its people is by having the people who are there demand it. I don't think that America is going to be able to put boots on the ground and make Iran not radical. I don't think that's a thing. I would say that Iran needs to change on its own, and it's just America's job to deal with the people that either approves of their behavior or doesn't approve of the behavior. And I just don't see enough behavior of Iran to approve of to think that we should have any deal in place with them.
Okay. Well, I think I also agree with you. It's not America's job, but it's the United Nations job. And if we're talking about sanctions, then we're talking about America realigning with its allies, with its historical allies, rejoining the JCPOA. Obviously, Iran going back into compliance, and if they don't, then you have the UN sanctions snapping back, which it would be more effective than proven historically to be more effective, such as in South Africa, than currently American unilateral sanctions. Like, we're gonna, we both want to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon, and hopefully, becoming a positive actor in the region. And that's only going to happen with international pressure. It's not going to happen with the USA continuing to view Iran as an adversary. And obviously, Iran and America have a long, not nice history that has to be overcome. There's 42 years now since the Iranian embassy, the hostages in the embassy. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's not going to be done with sieging Iran, and that's not going to change the regime.
I agree on all those points. I don't think it's a solution to what's going on. I don't think it's going to resolve the issue. But I have a question, or like a hypothetical.
I actually want to take this in a little bit of a different direction, because I think that we've had a lot of focus on should there be a deal at all. But I kind of want to bring it back to what that deal would look like if there was one, and if the U.S. were to re-enter one. I want to ask you, Lawrence. Israel has been pretty vocal, at least Bibi has been pretty vocal about, that he doesn't want there to be a deal. And with the Abraham Accords and seemingly a lot of cooperation between Israel and a lot of the other Arab countries in the region, it seems like they're all kind of on that side. But assuming that there should be some deal in place, how much influence do you think that Israel and the other Gulf nations and other Arab nations in the area should have over what that deal looks like?
I think in terms of the nuclear deal, which is the only deal on the table, they don't need to have any real part of it. They weren't part of the original negotiations directly. I think that needs to change. In terms of what Jeremy's saying, more about the Iran's other behavior in the region with regards to sponsoring terrorists and ballistic missiles, then yes, I think Israel, Saudi Arabia, the other Sunni states, and Iran need to come to some type of agreement, because ultimately it's a regional weapon issue, and if we can, and in that set, and you'll need a mediator. But who the mediator is going to be? Is that going to be America? Is that going to be Europe, the EU? Is it going to be Brexit Britain or China or Russia? But those are the issues that I think need to be discussed regionally. But again, you need to create some level of trust between the two parties or the two sides in this.
Jeremy, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I just go back to I think that it's noble to put them on the same playing field as you. Like, I just don't think they think like you. Did you serve in the Israeli army while you're living there? So I was in the army, and most people who worked on a checkpoint can tell, like, the soldiers there are not trying to hurt the people or get in their way or do anything. They're just trying to be secure, right? Go in, go out. But once a week, someone was coming with a weapon and they were going to stab someone. There's no reason for it. That person they were stabbing didn't do anything to the person who was there, but you were there and you saw it. Like, I know what it's like to see people who believe something that is completely off base. I don't mean like conservatives versus liberals where we just have different solutions to the same issues and going about it in a different way. They just have they're taught hate from a very, very young age, and they don't have any problem going back on their word. They don't have any problem lying to you or killing someone that's innocent. And to say that we just need to do one more thing for them to, figure out that they're better off thinking like us, I think it's noble. I just don't think it's realistic. So I think, like, to have these countries sit down at a table, who's going to mediate, I think it's just putting the cart before the horse. I don't think they're ready to sit down because their priorities aren't peace.
Well, they've already sat down to make the deal to restrict them having nuclear weapons. So again,
right, but I mean, how many times has like Kim Jong-un or Maduro sat down and then still gone and killed their people?
But it's
just a way to.
You're right. But the idea of yes, you're exactly right. The Iranians and the Maduro and the Kim Jong family in North Korea. They want to preserve their position, but it's clear that Iran have decided that the best way to preserve their position is by giving up nuclear weapons, which was the goal of the deal in the first place. Like, the thing is, I understand what it's like. It's scary because we have to trust the other side, but the only way to trust them, to be able to build trust, is to give them an opportunity to fulfill that trust. And you sort of get into this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, I'm not going to trust you, so I'm not going to give you an opportunity to trust. So nothing, you don't get to that situation. And with the nuclear deal, it was Trump who pulled out of it, even though the Iranians were were in compliance. And looking at it from that perspective, you gotta wonder why, why do the Iranians not trust America? They invaded their neighbor Iraq for no reason. It's just, if you look at it from the other, try and put some context and put it on the other side, it's just, I don't blame the Iranians for not trusting America.
Look at it from 4 years ago. Don't look at it through Trump, because everything viewed through the lens of Trump does a lot of crazy things. So it's hard to look at it through the eyes of Trump. Imagine what was 2016.
Guys, we're gonna start wrapping up here. If each of you want to give one final thought on the issue.
Jeremy, do you want to? I started. So who started? Oh, you started. I'll go first. So I will say, sanctions don't work. Like, the only way we can, build as I've been saying all along, the nuclear deal is imperfect. It's the best option available to us. Continue to not talk to Iran will not achieve anything. They'll continue to move along the path to get a nuclear weapon, which no one wants. So the best of the bad world to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon is to rejoin the treaty, and then hopefully build trust and create a future diplomatic progress.
Like I said before, different solutions to the same problems. I think that Lawrence made a lot of good points about what will and won't work. I think we arrive at a place where the Iran deal might actually work until the sunset clause, and then they will or will not renegotiate, or will or will not like our new terms. I think that the process needs a harder stop than a more diplomatic one before we can get there. That's pretty much it. I don't think we can negotiate in good faith with people who don't have the good faith yet.
Okay. All right. So before we wrap up this portion of the show and this conversation, I do want to wrap with a closing question for both of you. Jeremy, why don't we start with you? Do you feel like you found common ground here? Do you feel like this was productive, even in just as a way to discuss an issue?
Definitely productive, and definitely beneficial. It's good, even if not for just Lawrence and my sakes. It's good just to have people have the conversation and then be put out so that people can see the conversation. I think this is a more calming issue. But like, if you were to have the issue on, I say, more Trump-centric issues or things that revolved around Trump, you could get a much more heated argument, but you don't need to. And having conversations like this and having it on a forum where people can see, I think it's a really good thing.
Great. Lawrence?
Well, I definitely had fun, which was, I think, my goal for the evening. It's always good to have a conversation / debate. Jeremy, thanks very much. And yeah, like, it's not really up to, it's not up to me whether I find it beneficial. It's for the people who are the audience and people who are listening. So, write in the chat whether you found this beneficial or not. But I certainly had a good time, and I'm happy to come back and argue the liberal / Dovist side of an argument that I believe in anyway. So there you go.
All right, great. Thank you so much for stepping up and having this conversation, guys. If you want to exit, now's the time.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Okay, well, that was quite the conversation. One of the reasons why I chose this topic about the Iran deal is in contrast with our last show about social media and censorship and blocking, things like that. The Iran deal and the Iran issue in general is not something that really falls on party lines so much. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of different views coming out from all different parties, and not even just parties, all different countries. It's also an issue that has been actually a rallying point between Israel and its Arab neighbors, which is not something that comes around so often, certainly not, in modern history. So I thought it would be interesting to see a conversation on that topic. I thought it would also be interesting to see a conversation on that topic in particular, where the Israeli in the conversation was taking a more liberal perspective. A lot of the public messages that we see out of Israel on Iran are pretty conservative, pretty, pro sanction and pro in favor of tightening pressure on Iran. So I thought it'd be interesting to get a different perspective that I think a lot of people don't really see very often. I thought that they both really approached it, with knowledge and also with a lot of their own opinions. I thought that, there's no question that they were both speaking very respectfully to each other. I'm very glad that they were both able to feel like it was productive and that it was beneficial. And like I said, not even just for themselves, but for other people watching, certainly to be able to see two different sides of this issue and to see two people that certainly disagree on this issue having a calm and rational conversation about it. As for my own views, I do like to wrap up with that. There's no question that there's no real finite answer. Unfortunately, Iran gaining access to nuclear energy is a very real and very scary prospect, especially for those of us living in the region, but really for the world. And I think that, like they said at the beginning of the conversation, military action really should be avoided at all costs. Yes, Israel has done some pretty targeted strikes on Iran, and those have been beneficial and certainly necessary as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of a broad military strike, it's not something that's going to end peacefully. Certainly not in the region. I think any deal that's made, absolutely, I do disagree with Lawrence. I do think any deal that is made with Iran should be made with cooperation with Israel and the other Gulf states surrounding Iran, because at the end of the day, they know. I don't know that I would say they know better, but they certainly have a very keen awareness of what's going on, and what kind of buildup Iran has in terms of aggression, in terms of capability. The fact that countries who have for so long been on very opposite sides of most issues are rallying around one particular point should be very telling to a lot of people, and it certainly shouldn't be taken for granted. I think Bibi has made clear that any deal that is made with Iran should not allow Iran to have nuclear weapon capability at any time and at any cost. All these things really need to be addressed. I'm absolutely not a foreign policy expert, and it's really hard to come in and say, this is what should happen, because it's hard for anybody really to know. But I do think that there needs to be a much harder line drawn than the one that is currently written out in the current deal. What that looks like, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But there's no question in my mind that it needs to be made clear that Iran cannot and should not gain access to nuclear weapons. And I do think that Israel and the surrounding Arab Gulf countries should absolutely have influence over what that deal looks like. Thank you so much for tuning in and being part of promoting civil discourse. It's not always easy to do, but ultimately we need to find a way to understand and respect each other, even when we don't agree. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more like it, or if you'd like to take part in the project, please follow the Civil Discourse Project on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so please follow there. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section. and we'd love to hear from you. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy. See you next time.